In order to understand Turkey's approach towards the conflict in Syria, one first needs to explain the military situation there as of September 2018. There are localized clashes between militant groups led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda, and the Syrian Arab Army, SAA, in northern Latakia and southern Idlib. The Syrian Arab Air Force and the Russian Aerospace Forces have recently carried out a series of strikes on weapon depots, equipment and UAV workshops and key facilities belonging to militants in southern and southwestern Idlib. These, as well as deployment of additional SAA units at the contact line between the militant-held and government-held areas, are described by pro-militant sources as clear signs of the upcoming SAA operation to defeat Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and other al-Qaeda-like factions there. The situation became especially complex following the September 17th announcement by the Turkish and Russian presidents that a 15 to 20 kilometre deep demilitarised zone between militants and government troops will be established in the Idlib de-escalation zone. All heavy weaponry, including battle tanks and artillery, as well as hardline militants, have to be withdrawn from the area before October the 10th, and the zone itself is set to be established by October 15th. However, it is still unclear how it will be possible, without employing a military option, to force radical militant groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to obey. In Suwaida and Rif Dimashq, the SAA is still working to eliminate ISIS cells operating in the desert area. Separate ISIS attacks on the SAA and the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces SDF happen from time to time. In those parts of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor provinces which are controlled by the Kurdish-dominated SDF, the healthcare system has been totally destroyed, and no effort is being made to restore major infrastructure. Many of the areas under SDF control suffer from epidemics due to the shortage of clean water and a nearly total absence of medical services. Local authorities, who should be involved in these matters, are mainly concerned with their own well-being. Kurdish leaders still view their main task as the creation of an independent enclave and later their own state in these territories. This is why their main concern is to maintain political and military dominance in the Arab-populated area. Negotiations between Damascus and the Kurds are continuing at a slow pace. The Kurdish political leadership is seeking to get concessions from Damascus, for example, for some kind of federation within Syria. Afrin, controlled by the Turkish Armed Forces, TAF, and Ankara proxies, is experiencing low-intensity guerrilla war. Cells of the Kurdish People's Protection Units YPG regularly carry out bombings and run attacks on Turkey-led forces. The TAF has introduced additional security measures, increased the number of UAVs deployed, and imposed the practice of burning plots close to cities in order to react to YPG raids more quickly. However, the YPG continues a limited partisan war in Afrin, but without having sufficient forces to return it to their control. At the regional level, Ankara wants to position itself as the most important player in the matter of resolving the Syrian crisis. Turkey is actively supporting only those formations in Syria which are loyal to and affiliated with it. The purpose is to turn Syria into a country loyal to Turkey, to neutralize Kurdish armed formations, to replace the Assad government, and to create a reliable pathway for energy supplies, especially oil, to Turkey. To achieve these goals, Ankara is using the rhetoric of counter-terrorism, though in reality it will support any organization ready to help it achieve its goals. On the local level, Turkey's goals and tasks consist of two parts. The first is to deal with Kurdish armed formations in northern Syria. Turkey is directly fighting Kurdish armed groups in northern Syria, mainly the YPG. The YPG is the core of the US-backed SDF. At the same time, the YPG is linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, both militarily and politically. Turkey, alongside with the US and many other states, consider the PKK a terrorist group. Despite this, the YPG and the PYD, as a dominating part of the SDF, receive support from the US. The announcement that SDF bases would be used to prepare so-called Border Security Forces, BSF, which would protect SDF-YPG-occupied parts of Syria, provoked a sharply negative reaction in Ankara, which accused the US of creating a terrorist army on the border with Turkey. If the BSF is successfully established, it would become an important step for the PYD-YPG, backed by the US, en route to establish a Kurdish semi-independent state within Syrian territory. This scenario is unacceptable for Turkey because such a state would pose a direct threat to its national security. This became one of the key reasons behind Turkey's Operation Olive Branch against the YPG in the Syrian area of Afrin. From January the 20th to March 24, 2018, the TAF and Turkish-backed militant groups delivered a devastating blow to the YPG in Afrin and captured most of the area. Most of the YPG members and their supporters had fled to the government-controlled part of Aleppo province. The Turkish advance stopped when forces reached Syrian army positions. This was the second Turkish military operation carried out in northern Syria. The first one, dubbed Operation Euphrates Shield, took place in the Al-Bab-Azaz-Jarablus Triangle from August 24, 2016 to March 29, 2017. The operation followed an attempt by Kurdish armed factions to link up their areas in northwestern and northeastern Syria, and it put an end to these plans. The second goal is to keep and expand influence in the province of Idlib. The TAF started entering the province in October 2017 within the framework of the de-escalation zone agreement reached by Ankara, Tehran and Moscow in the Astana talks format. Since then, they have established 12 observation posts in the de-escalation zone. Russia have established 10 and Iran 7 posts near the de-escalation zone under the same agreement. On May 28, 2018, 11 groups within the Turkish-backed part of the Free Syrian Army announced the creation of the National Liberation Front NLF, also known as Chapat al-Wataniya lil-Tariya. On the same day, an NLF official announced that the Turkey-created force will take over the Idlib de-escalation zone. Russia, Turkey and Iran will monitor the situation for 6 to 12 months, after which a new phase will follow. All the groups in the region will be disbanded and a single army on the basis of the NLF will be created. Idlib will be governed by local Turkish-controlled councils with minimal influence from Russia and Iran, said Omar Katsayafa. Turkish forces and their proxies have contributed no effort to combating the influence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is excluded from the de-escalation. Rather, it is carrying out active attempts to increase its influence in the area and preserve the core of the anti-Assad forces. According to available data, Turkey is conducting active negotiations with the group's leader, Abu Mohammed al-Julani, in an attempt to convince him to rebrand the group once again and to merge with the Turkey-led opposition. Ankara also allowed the NFL and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to carry out a large-scale crackdown on public figures, field commanders and activists who supported the idea of a possible peaceful reconciliation with the Damascus government. At the same time, the security situation in the militant-controlled part of Idlib province remains poor. Over the past few months, the area has been hit by multiple bombings and assassinations aimed at both civilian and militant targets. When the Syrian conflict began, Turkey turned its own territory, particularly the border zone, into infrastructure used to this day by armed formations for training, rest and medical support. The Istanbul-Gaziantep route, unofficially dubbed the Jihad Express, was the main route for jihadists heading for Syria in 2014-16. The Kilis Azaz border crossing was also a major logistical hub for militants moving to Syria. Moreover, many Turkish border settlements were de facto bases where militants were assembled and prepared for crossing the border. A letter dated March 15, 2013, and signed by Turkey's Minister of the Interior, Muammer Güler, stating that Hatay province was acquiring strategic importance in the context of the transfer of militants from Turkey to Syria, deserved separate treatment. The enabling of movement within the region, the training and provision of medical aid to wounded fighters, and their crossing of the border into Syria was mainly conducted through this province. According to the letter, Turkey's National Intelligence Organization, MIT, and other organizations, which received corresponding authority, would coordinate the work with Hatay province leadership. The letter notes that it is advantageous to place the fighters in hostels run by the Ministry of Religious Affairs and government hotels in the province, on direct instructions from the MIT. Similar letters were sent to the Mardin, Urfa and Antep provinces. Hatay hosts the camp for SAA deserters in Apaydin, only 2 kilometers from the Syrian border. In September 2012, this camp was considered the FSA headquarters, according to Mehmet Ali Edibolu, a member of the Republican People's Party. At that time, there were about 300 former Syrian soldiers and police, including about 30 generals, in the camp. In September 2013, a Deutsche Welle report mentioned that hundreds of fighters from al-Qaeda-affiliated organizations were delivered by Turkish ambulances from Syria to the Salim Pinar hospital, and those who suffered more serious wounds were delivered to the Balikdigol hospital in Sanliurfa province. In August 2014, the Daily Mail published an article about the border town of Reyhanli, which was part of the pipeline for militants into Syria, and where Turkish border guards turned a blind eye. ISIS militants rested in the city itself before crossing the border. Military uniforms, and possibly also weapons, were being sold right on the streets. Starting in March 2015, Syrian rebels were trained with the help of US and Turkish soldiers at a base in Kirzahir in central Turkey. The US announced that they would fight against ISIS, but representatives of the Turkish opposition said that the trained militants would mainly fight against the Assad government. The Turkish authorities confirmed in March 2015 the fact of a wounded ISIS field commander, who was a Turkish citizen, undergoing treatment in the hospital in Denizli. As of 2016, the city of Antalya in Hatay hosted a training camp for FSA members who were fighting in the Operation Euphrates Shield. The media more than once reported the presence of a training camp for rebels in Adana province, 8 kilometers from the Incirlik air base. Turkish Air Force officials didn't comment on these reports, and journalists had no access to the base. The official justification for this approach was that refugees and opposition fighters ought to have free movement across the border. Two main forces capitalizing on this situation were Jabhat al-Nusra, now known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and ISIS, who were receiving recruits, funds and weapons through Turkish territory. Furthermore, Ankara's ties to these groups are based not only on fighting Assad, but also on economic relations, and neither Turkish soldiers nor intelligence professionals have any illusions concerning the situation. After the start of the Russian military operation in Syria and multiple public revelations of Turkish links to these terrorist groups, such as participation in the ISIS oil business, free movement of these terrorists across the border ceased. Otherwise, the Erdogan government would have become publicly a sponsor of terrorism, which was unacceptable for Erdogan's image. But the main reason for the closure of the border crossing was the series of defeats ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra suffered, Turkey's re-evaluation of its strategy in Syria under Russian pressure, and a reduction in the flow of refugees. Turkey currently uses a whole range of military instruments to advance its interests. During Operation Olive Branch in January to March 2018, Turkey involved the 12 following groups as a core of its proxy force: the Hamza Division, Liwa Sultan Murad, Faylaq al-Sham, Jaish al-Nasr, Jaish al-Nukhba, Jabhat al-Isalat wal-Tanmiyah, the 23rd Division, the 1st Coastal Division, the 2nd Coastal Division, the Free Idlib Army, the 2nd Army, and Liwa Shuhada al-Islam. These groups have an estimated manpower of around 31,200. Besides this, the operation also involved fighters from other groups, like Ara al-Sham, the Sham Legion, and others. Some of these groups are now part of the National Liberation Front, created in an attempt to boost the combat potential and numeric strength of the pro-Turkey bloc in the province of Idlib. Another entity created in order to overcome the divisions plaguing the many groups controlled by Ankara is the Syrian National Army, SNA. It was intended to serve as a force against Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Idlib if negotiations between Turkey and the group fail. The SNA will also participate in operations against Kurdish armed groups and will be responsible for consolidating the territories captured by Turkey-led forces. Finally, the creation of the SNA is an effort to rebrand so-called democratic activists after they have tarnished their image with war crimes or with collaboration with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. As of today, the SNA is mainly operating in the Al-Bab-Azaz-Jarablus Triangle and in Afrin. When operations in northern Syria are complete, all SNA forces from Jarablus to Idlib should be under a single command. The main force of the SNA are its 1st, 2nd and 3rd Corps. The SNA formation is proceeding parallel to that of the National Liberation Front. The SNA, formed on 30th of May 2017 as a separate force from the FSA, is a new army divided into 3 corps, consisting of 36 opposition groups under the aegis of the FSA. As of January 2018, it was still being formed and included 25,000 members. The first reports of the Turkey-controlled Free Syrian Police, FSP, appeared in January 2017. Police units were formed in Jarablus as part of the Operation Euphrates Shield in order to help the FSA in their rear areas. By October 25, 2017, the Turkey Police Academy had graduated 5,631 Syrian police officers in 5 different schools, according to Anadolu Agency police sources. Syrian policemen were trained to provide security and protection in regions covered by the operation. Some 20% of the participants received SWAT training. Starting on May 10, 2018, after training in Turkey, 620 FSP are ensuring security in northwest Afrin. In the autumn of 2018, the situation in Idlib and nearby militant-held areas became the main point of attention of the international media covering the conflict in Syria. The rationale for Turkey's collaboration with Idlib armed groups is their desire to expand their own influence, while preserving the radical segment of these formations as a shock force to continue exerting pressure on the Assad government, Iran and Russia. The pattern of working with these groups in the province is set up as follows. Small armed groups which did well in Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch are under nearly full operational control. Groups united around Ara al-Sham, known as the Syrian Liberation Front, are under partial control. Al-Qaeda in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and their allies, are in a state of fruitful cooperation with less than total control, less than with the SLF. The future of small groups not included in the above categories, due to their links with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, for example the remnants of Jund al-Aqsa or Hilf Nusrat al-Islam, is yet to be determined. ISIS cells in Idlib. Turkey and its local allies have been fighting them with varying success. The problem is that, ideologically, the core of pro-Turkish groups and their allies is quite similar to ISIS. This is made worse by the horrifying level of corruption in and violence by the security forces of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the Syrian Liberation Front, which are the only forces capable of relatively significant action against ISIS cells. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham remains the dominant military force in Idlib, alongside the Syrian Liberation Front. The problem of the Turkish approach is that the stronger the force, the harder it is to control it behind closed doors without offering guarantees. Hence various PR armies, such as the SNA. While sabotaging the fight against terrorists, Ankara is strenuously pretending it is forming the moderate opposition. The total amount of financing provided to militant groups in Syria from Turkey has never been assessed, but it's in the tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars a year. It has varied at different stages of the conflict and was dispersed through various sources. In 2012 to 2016, the main source of financing was aid from foreign sponsors. Ankara was not too shy to use funds from the US, from the Persian Gulf monarchies, domestic or foreign volunteers supporting these or other groups. One should also include the CIA program, worth $500 million, to train Syrian insurgents. The 2015-16 migration crisis led to EU-Turkey negotiations on financial aid to Ankara, in return for which Turkey housed the refugees. Turkey asked for €30 billion up front, to be followed by annual payments of €3 billion. But it isn't known how much Turkey actually received, though there was an agreement on €3 billion in 2016 and another 3 by 2018. Considering the numerous world media reports on the terrible conditions for refugees in Turkey, it's likely that the money is mostly being used to finance groups fighting Assad, while refugees are given the lowest priority. Moreover, the Turkish Ministry of Defense and the MIT probably have budget items which are used to finance armed groups, though these would obviously be classified. As the flow of jihadists and activities of volunteers declined, opposition groups fighting in Syria apparently shifted to self-sufficiency, which looks as follows. Turkey provides weapons, munitions, equipment, transportation and training. In return, it receives resources from the occupied territory, oil, agricultural and industrial products. The priority is given to Turkey-manufactured goods in trade on occupied territory. Turkey also continues to play the role of a clearinghouse for financing, though now to a lesser extent. Turkey uses a range of ideologically divided groups ranging from neo-Osmanist and pan-Turkic to ultra-radical Islamist ones, all of which are incompatible with the current Syrian government. This shows that in order to fulfill his own political ambitions, Erdogan is ready to make alliances with almost anybody who may serve his interests. According to the UNHCR, in April 2018, there were 3.9 million refugees from Syria in Turkey. Such a number of people cannot help but attract the attention of the Turkish military and intelligence for the purpose of ideological indoctrination and recruitment to fight a war for the new Syria, as envisioned by Erdogan.